in Saudi Arabia for the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein was sending Scud missiles to Riyadh, where we were, and he was trying to hit the airport, the military airport. Well, that's what we think anyway. The military airport was about 1 kilometer away from where we were living. So every time one of those Scud missiles would come in to the kingdom, it would just rattle the windows in your house, and we would get phone calls that would say, it's showtime, and so we were supposed to go to our little safety pantry. That's all it was. It was just the little closet in our house. Because at that time they didn't know if the Scud missiles were poisonous and all that kind of stuff. And this goes on and on and on. The good thing about that was that there were lots of soldiers there. And female soldiers who were driving trucks. It was good for my soul. When we would see these female soldiers driving down the road, like, yeah, they were the only ones allowed to drive in the Matawa. We tried to, you know, tell them that, yeah, try to stop them. And again, I kid you not, I saw this one lady and this Matawa guy, because they're not really big people. I knew I could take one out if I had to. Because they were always snapping their fingers at me. It just drove me crazy. But this Matawa came and tried to hit her with the stick, and boy, she just, boom! He went down. All the other Matawa kind of stood there. And then they left. But I was like, yeah.
You don't take on a lady with a truck.
Yeah. But the problem with that armed conflict, and well, one of the many problems, if it's in a country where women aren't allowed to drive, shouldn't be going out in public without male escorts and so male family member escorts. So if they all go off to fight in this war, then
how are you going to get out?
Yeah. How do you get to the grocery store?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you do? What does that do? How do you take your kids to school? What does that do to the education system in the culture? What does it do to just daily life of the culture? So that, again, another example of one of those things where women's rights and armed conflict, they clash. We did have a friend one time, she was with her driver, and she was buying some things at the store. She handed her bags to him, and made a little joke, because he was going to take them to the car and everything. She got arrested.
What?
For being a prostitute.
Why?
Because she was in public with a male who was not a family member, and she was interacting with him publicly.
Oh.
You don't know.
Really?
So she gets arrested. Now the hard part for her then was that her husband was out of the kingdom at the time.
Oh.
So how's she going to get out? How's she going to get out of jail? So her husband's boss had to go down to jail. Now fortunately her husband worked for a very big company that had lots of influence within the kingdom, and they were able to get her out of jail. During that time we had some friends who, we all stayed there for several years. We lived there for 9 years, and then we all go our separate ways. We had some good friends who ended up living in northern Indonesia. There's a lot of mining in that there. And there are 2 international schools. One's at the top of the mountain, the other's at the bottom of the mountain. And in August one year, right before school started, all the new teachers and returning teachers, they were going off for a picnic before school so they could get to know each other and all that. On their way back, they're in several cars, a line of cars, and somebody begins shooting at them. And what most people in the world do not know, it is the largest direct attack on American citizens, terrorist attack on American citizens that were killed. But it didn't really get publicized very much because it was a mining community and all that. The shooting in that lasted for about 30-40 minutes. And the guy in the first car of the caravan of cars, he was shot point blank, killed, boom. Shot his wife, They were very good friends. Another couple, they had and their daughter must have been maybe around 5 at that time.
Was she in the car?
She was in the car, they all got shot. They were hiding behind the cars while they were being shot at. So the people who were doing the shooting started aiming at the gas tanks of the cars, so the cars would blow up while they were trying to hide behind them. And they could hear them laughing as they were doing all of this. Eventually, a local man who had a big truck, and he drove in and he parked his truck in between the people who were doing the shooting and where these families were. He ended up getting shot himself, but it gave enough time for help to arrive. They were all so seriously injured. Our friends were shot, he was shot in the leg, stomach, she was shot in the head, daughter was shot. Many of them were then airlifted to northern Australia. What's the one that starts with a C?
Kent?
Yes. They ended up having to live there for 6 months or so until they were well enough then to be able to travel. The local government did finally round up about 12 guys and took them to trial, said these are the guys who did it. What came out then a few years later was, in fact, it was not those 12 guys. It was government soldiers, because at the time there were government soldiers and rebels who were having conflict. And the companies, the mining companies, had stopped paying their protection fees. And so the government soldiers were trying to make a point out of this is what will happen if you don't keep paying your protection fees. So armed conflict and wars and that, it's not just about soldiers fighting each other anymore. Everybody gets involved. Civilians, it's very hard for modern day armed conflict to keep civilians from being injured, and you hear that on the news all the time, is how civilians are being used as human shields and things like that.